Well, a lot of people seem to believe that fossils take a very long time to form, thousands, millions of years in order to form, but the existence of a fossil by itself is actually proof that something happened very, very fast. When an organism dies, there's all parts of the environment that are trying to destroy it. There's the weather, there's erosion, there's scavengers and other animals that are going to come and tear apart the fossil. But as soon as the organism dies, if it's covered by sediment and protected from the environment, then the process of fossilization can start. And we know from modern examples that fossilization, as far as converting the bone or the shell into rock, can actually happen very, very fast, in a matter of months. Since we know that fossils have to form quickly in order to become fossils at all, we also know, therefore, that the rocks that the fossils are formed in must themselves have been formed quickly as well. So creationists who study the geological record and the geological column can agree with some of our evolutionary colleagues on something, the order of the fossils. But what we're going to disagree with is about the ages that my evolutionary colleagues ascribe to those rocks, not the order of them themselves.
Charles Darwin said the fossil record would show evolution, but in fact, at the time it didn't, and he predicted it would. But it doesn't. And the prediction that he made has not been borne out by research since. We've found millions of fossils, and we do not find the fine gradation of change of one basic kind to another. And in fact, it's a huge problem for the whole idea of evolution.
It is the big level differences between animals, these phylum level differences, that should give us our best example of evolutionary transitions. You need more transitions in order to split from something like a jellyfish into something like an arthropod, like a lobster. It's precisely these big level differences that have the smallest amount of evidential basis for Darwinian evolution. One of the most intractable problems in paleontology is one of Darwin's own devising. When Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, he knew of a group of fossils low in the geological column called the Cambrian. Since Darwin believed that all animals shared common ancestors, he believed that the animals in the Cambrian must therefore have ancestors in the rocks below them. To put the Cambrian explosion in context, let's think of Earth history like a football field. On an old age system, the beginning of the Earth at one end zone is 4.5 billion years ago, and the present is at the other end zone. The Cambrian starts all the way across the field at the opposing team's 12-yard line and extends for 1 full yard. The Cambrian explosion, though, where we see the first appearance of all of these different animal body plans, these phylum-level divisions, happens in just 4 inches. It's not even the whole yard. So in the 4 inches that is the Cambrian explosion, this narrow slice of time in geology, we have the first appearance of animals that are as different from each other as mollusks and clamshells from jellyfish. These are huge anatomical differences that are supposed to happen in a window of time where in other areas you're arguing about whether or not humans and gorillas shared a common ancestor. A small difference anatomically compared to the huge body level divisions that we see first appear in the Cambrian.
But you know, there are no precursors to the Cambrian fauna in the Precambrian rocks. The Precambrian supposedly represents a couple of billion years of history, yet it shows nothing more than blue-green algae and bacteria, maybe a few other things thrown in late in the Precambrian. So one thing we hear a lot is that maybe the ancestors of the Cambrian fauna were soft bodies, so they didn't leave any remains behind to be fossilized. And Darwin in The Origin of Species, he said, no organism wholly soft can be preserved. But that is nonsense, for even he knew fossil sand ripples and even raindrops were preserved in the rocks. And today, we have fossils of jellyfish, of worms, right from the fossil record.
While the Cambrian explosion stands as strong evidence against evolutionary predictions, it's actually exactly what creationists would expect out of the fossil record. If Noah's flood created the bulk of our fossils and sedimentary rocks, then we would expect that as the flood starts in the ocean and drives its way on towards the continents, that it would pick up these marine ecosystems, burying them in sediment and driving them up onto the land where they would become fossilized and become sedimentary rocks. The thing about the Cambrian explosion that's so interesting is that when we look and see in those first 4 inches, when all these different animal phyla appear, it's a complex and complete ecosystem. This isn't a single organism that shows up and then later on another organism and then later another. It's an entire suite of organisms that were in one place, were catastrophically buried, and their remains were driven onto the continents.
The basic features of the fossil record: sudden appearance. There's an absence of transitions leading to the first appearance of a particular kind of animal. And the other feature is that fossils basically stay the same within their kinds. There might be some variations, but they're small compared with what is to be anticipated if evolution from amoebas to people happened.
Evolutionists argue that the fossil record is incomplete, but this is no longer an adequate answer to this because we have millions of fossils that have been found. And the more fossils we find, the more clear it is that the transitions are missing.
The idea of transitional species or missing links has been embedded in the public's mind for over 100 years. Most of the early finds have not withstood the test of time, like Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, and there are a lot of claims circulating today, but most of the current claims fall into the creationist idea of variation within a kind. If I were to pick 3 really famous fossils just from the last decade, I'd have to choose Ida, which was clearly a lemur, Puhila, which supposedly is the ancestor to seals, but which really looks like a modern otter, and Tiktaalik, which they tried to use as a club to beat the creationists over the head. But then some evolutionists found footprints of a 4-legged animal in some rocks in Poland that the evolutionists had dated to millions of years older than Tiktaalik. So not only was Tiktaalik not transitional, but right now there's no candidate for that transition.
What we do see is evidence for the creationist orchard, where you get variation within a kind. You get a number of different horse species and these sorts of things. And so the horse fossil record fits in beautifully with the concept of a basic created horse kind developing into different species over time.
Now throw into this mix what are called living fossils, and the evolutionary picture gets quite fuzzy. These are fossils that are allegedly millions of years old, yet look extremely similar to the supposed descendants that are still alive today. Horseshoe crabs have been around in their basic configuration for what's claimed millions of years. Same with dragonflies, the coelacanth, and many, many other things. Now, if all these creatures have not changed over millions of years, where's the evolution?
These cross supposed 500 million years of time, according to evolution. You have things like jellyfish and starfish and all sorts of things that actually are the same today as in the fossil record hundreds of millions of years ago. And in that time frame, a worm has changed into you and me, according to evolution, for which there's no fossil record showing that that happened.
A lot of people claim that maybe the animal was perfectly adapted to its environment, so it didn't need to change, but that is silly. I mean, some of those species have survived the greatest episodes of climate change and disaster in Earth history, like the supposed meteor that hit the Earth 65 million years ago and killed off the dinosaurs, or the end Permian extinction event where 99% of all species on Earth supposedly went extinct. There's been no constant environment in which to live during all of Earth history, so animals had to evolve to their surroundings in order to survive. But also, other species have supposedly been evolving ways to eat the older species, so how could they possibly have stayed the same as everything else changed around them? One major evolutionary icon is the alleged evolution of humans from ape-like creatures. But I don't know any paleontologist today that'd be able to draw that smooth transitional series we saw in previous decades. There are so many supposed species in the evolutionary tree of human history today, it's hard even to list them all, but let's just pick the most popular one, Neanderthal man. It was originally depicted as a half-monkey, a distant relative, a real caveman. But today, everything has changed. Different paleontologists are trying to make the case that Neanderthal painted in caves, ceremonially buried their dead with their heads pointing towards the sunrise, made musical instruments, had the controlled use of fire, searched the landscape for rare minerals in order to make cosmetics. That is not the Neanderthal man I grew up with. And now that the genetics revolution is upon us, we've been able to construct 5 or 6 different Neanderthal genomes. There's strong evidence that modern man and Neanderthals interbred, meaning we are the same species by definition. Neanderthals are just a family group that lived in Europe and Asia after the flood. But the evolutionist says that these Neanderthal skeletons are tens of thousands of years old. But we're still finding DNA in them? As a geneticist, that's not supposed to be. That is shocking, but what's even more shocking is finding soft tissues in fossils that are supposedly much, much older.
For about a decade now, there's been mounting evidence of soft tissue that's still preserved inside dinosaur bones. Now, if these bones are supposed to be millions and millions of years old, the soft tissues like blood vessels and red blood cells and other materials should have long since degraded. But starting in 2005, with the discovery of a dinosaur leg bone from Tyrannosaurus rex, there were these different soft tissues that were in there, and they were still stretchy. A blood vessel that could actually be taken with tweezers and stretched out would snap back into place. More material was discovered, different types of proteins have been identified in laboratories, and now there are mounting evidences coming in from a wide range of different types of fossil animals from the so-called age of dinosaurs. We've got Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, a duck-billed dinosaur, even eggs from sauropod dinosaurs, those are the long neck ones, from China. And so with mounting evidence now from not only North America, and not just one unit in North America, but from multiple levels of rock in the record, and from different continents, soft tissue is being identified more and more by more researchers in paleontology.
In 2013, a remarkable paper was published documenting the discovery of bone cells and DNA from dinosaur bone. Now, they proved the DNA with 3 independent chemical tests, and they also found DNA in certain parts of the cell, which is just what we'd expect to find if it was in a cell nucleus. Also, they found proteins called histones, and that's where DNA is coiled up in dinosaur cells. They would not be found in bacteria, so this rules out contamination. So the recent experiments on how fast DNA breaks down shows that even under ideal conditions, it would not last anywhere near the time since dinosaurs were meant to have become extinct. These ideal conditions are temperatures well below freezing. Now, in real life, dinosaurs were meant to have lived in very warm climates, and warmth means that DNA would decay even more quickly. Therefore, the presence of DNA in dinosaur bones is very strong evidence against the millions of years timescale.
150 years after Darwin, the transitions are still missing. And the fossil record still doesn't reflect evolution over billions of years, but the rocks in which the fossils are found are often used as evidence for billions of years of time.
Well, originally, the early geologists believed the Bible, and they took the biblical account of history as being what really happened. And so based on that, they came to the idea that things happened quickly during the creation and the flood. They even developed some geological histories based on that idea.
Later on, at the very turn of the 19th century, you start to get people who are arguing the geological processes from the rock record can only be explained using processes that we see around us today in the world. And so when we see people like Hutton or Lyell who argue for what's now called uniformitarianism, they would look at the geological events that were happening in the world, say how often a river flooded and how much sediment it deposited in its floodplain. They would then say, okay, if there's 1 inch worth of sediment that was deposited this year and next year there's another inch, then when I look at the geological column and I see a rock unit that looks kind of like a flood zone of a river, I should only use the rates that I see today in the modern realm to estimate the amount of time that it took to create that rock. From a myriad of different philosophical and theological reasons, uniformitarianism took over the place of catastrophism as they argued effectively, in many cases, that catastrophes, which are not greatly experienced in a day-to-day realm, could not be applied to the geological record. Their arguments, I think, were wrong, but they were effective and they won the day. And it would be over 100 years that a strict view of uniformitarianism, that slow rates and gradual processes, could be the only explanations in geology. It wouldn't be until the middle to late 1900s that we start to see geologists prying themselves from the shackles of uniformitarianism and allowing catastrophes to get a place back in geology. It's not as far as we would like, it's not Noah's flood, but they're starting to recognize that catastrophes do most of the work in geology.
Glacial erosion is usually associated with smooth surfaces and grooves left by the glaciers themselves. But there's another erosional feature which is very interesting, namely, what happens to the meltwater that accumulates at the foot of the glaciers. It sometimes bursts as channelized flow, like huge torrents. As they move fast and they carry a lot of sediments with them, they are capable of cutting gaps like this one, in this ridge. So this was a continuous ridge, which was literally cut by the torrent that came from underneath the glaciers.
In 1980, there was an eruption of Mount St. Helens, and from this single eruption, a pyroclastic flow, that is a flow of hot gas and ash, as it erupted, it left behind some 25 feet, some 8 meters of sediment, which was finally layered, and this was deposited in a very rapid time, less than a day.
From what was learned at Mount St. Helens, we can now understand that there's all sorts of geological processes that can happen in the blink of an eye. From the formation of layered sedimentary units, we can find that there are tens of feet of rock unit that can be formed with fine laminations and thin layerings in between them, be formed in a matter of days. The erosion of small canyons that are like miniature laboratories for understanding how larger canyon systems, like the Grand Canyon or the other large canyons of the American Southwest, have been formed. Those formed, in one case a day, in another case a couple of months. These processes give us a window into understanding the larger scale catastrophes and help us model these larger scale catastrophes when we try and apply our knowledge of geology to Noah's flood. As a geologist, trying to wrap my mind around how much energy Noah's flood actually produced is even hard to do for me. But one thing the creation geologists recognize is that the modern catastrophes that we have, while they give us a tiny glimpse, they really don't come close to the scope and scale of the energy that's being released during the flood. As the fountains of the Great Deep break open, this means that the Earth itself is being fractured, broken, mashed, and continents are moving vertically, horizontally, moving around with respect to one another, and as a result, tsunami after tsunami after tsunami keeps hitting the continents and driving floodwaters over top of them. The rain is unending. The energy to produce earthquakes and various types of geological catastrophes would be without parallel in the modern world. And so right now we look at the movement of the continents and it's very, very little. But during the flood, we're not talking about continental drift anymore. We're talking about continental sprint, where the continents are moving at rapid paces through the floodwaters and causing all sorts of geological havoc. During the singular event of Noah's flood, catastrophic plate tectonics predicts that the pre-flood ocean crust would be dragged down into the mantle in a process we call subduction. Because that happened very recently, only a few thousands of years ago, the cold ocean crust should still be cold even though it has descended into the deep, hot mantle. Modern seismologists have discovered that there are indeed huge, big, cold slabs of rock down near the core of the Earth itself, in areas that should have warmed up if millions and millions of years worth of time were what have brought those slabs down instead of Noah's flood. The fact that we have cold slabs of rock is a confirmation of flood geology, not of old age geology. Another amazing prediction that has been confirmed in catastrophic plate tectonics is rapid magnetic field reversal. The Earth's magnetic field draws our compass needles towards north, but sometimes in Earth history, it draws it towards the south. Old age geologists believe that magnetic reversals have been happening for hundreds of millions of years and would have taken thousands of years to occur. Ironically, it was actually old Earth geologists working in the Pacific Northwest that found confirming evidence in support of rapid magnetic field reversals that are required for Noah's flood. They were taking a look at lava flows, and looking at lava flows that would only take a couple of weeks in order to form. They took measurements of the skin of the lava to see the magnetic orientation. They were expecting to see almost no change as they went deeper into the lava, where the interior should shift only slightly. Instead, what they found is that the outside skin of the lava pointed north and the inside pointed south. So we have confirming evidence from lava flows that the switch of the magnetic field has to happen rapidly, which is exactly what flood geologists expect.
It's amazing to think we can find marine fossils like algae in the very lowest rocks in the geologic column, and marine fossils on top of the highest mountains like Mount Everest. Well, how did they get there? Well, evolutionists would say that slow, gradual uplift over millions of years led to the formation of the mountain ranges and pushed the fossils up along with them.
But there are some things about modern mountain belts that we see that don't seem to fit with this conventional view. Rock is brittle. It doesn't bend very easily. When you bend it, it breaks. Now, granted, on a big scale, you might be able to get some pretty big bends out of a large rock. But these bends are tight and close, and you can walk from one end of them to the other. This type of bend and folding without breaking the brittle rock means that maybe it wasn't brittle rock at the time of its formation. These might have been much softer materials. After all, they were laid down during Noah's flood. They've been compacted down, started off horizontal, but then as tectonic movements occurred, they shifted and folded them while they were probably still soft. So when we look at it this way, what we realize is that the really tall mountain chains, the Alps, the Rockies, the Himalayas, they didn't exist before the flood. The whole reason that they exist is because of the flood.
So basically, when we look at the geology of the Earth, we find that present processes do not explain what we see.